So we'll start off with just kind of each one of you just kind of give your a look back at 2020, looking forward to 2021, based in your level of expertise, because this is a little different than, for example, we had the North Carolina economic forecast that the chamber does every year, that they just did today, and usually it's an economist, and someone from a bank and things like that, because it's with the Bankers Association. You kind of get an overview and things like that, which is nice. But so how do we differentiate ourselves from that when we do these type of things? Well, we kind of like to kind of drill into these different industries, construction, transportation, manufacturing, those kind of things. And so that's based on your expertise in each one of these things. I think it's going to add something really nice. So it's not, we're not competing with one of these other forecasts. It's almost like a complement, or footnotes, if you will. But based on that, still, Mark, if you could kind of give us an overview from your, because you do kind of look at the big picture type things as well, to kind of kick us off from that standpoint. I thought that might be really good. So what do you see? What did you see, and how do you see us moving forward?
Okay. As you said, it's last year at this time, I was talking about how 2020 was just going to be a great year, and it really was poised to be a great year. So the reason I bring this up, any economy is a complex system, and a lot of different variables do change. This is really going to be even more so today, and given what happened yesterday, that actually adds a little bit of issue. Not only is it the COVID, but even if we were to get all the vaccinations out there and done within 6 months, we still have a long way to go in terms of getting supply chain management back on, the supply chain back into sync and a few other things. So looking at that, I'll come back to that in a second. Overall, North Carolina really is looking very good. And again, relative to the other states and even the rest of the world, in terms of exposure to COVID at the workplace, about 35% of workers in North Carolina have jobs where they're highly exposed to it. That's actually one of the best in the country. We really are. Most of those are going to be in the retail sector, accommodations and services, healthcare, things like that. So we're actually doing pretty well in terms of just the exposure. We had some hits in terms of everybody did. I'll talk about that in just a second. But overall, things were not as bad as people thought they were a year ago or 9 months ago, and how bad they thought they were going to be. And so things, I think, are really looking up again for 2020, but it's going to be dependent again on getting the vaccines out, which we have done a pretty poor job. It's about 1.3% of the population so far. And how people are going to respond. Again, when you open up restaurants, they may not want to go. They still may not want to go to movie theaters. So let's take a look at that right now. And again, I bring this up because we have what was really an induced cycle, not a, something that was an induced unemployment, not a cyclical unemployment. So we're seeing those changes already. State GDP took a big hit, down 34% from where it was in February, but it's rebounded quite a bit. We've up 35% just in the third quarter. The expectation is we'll probably see about 4 to 5% growth in 2021. It was about 601 billion at the beginning of the year. We're about 594 billion annualized now. So again, it's still down, but we do expect to see things will be picking back up in the year. We're seeing the new orders for manufacturing are up. Looking at different indices, North Carolina is actually doing really well in terms of manufacturing orders. Looking at unemployment, or just unemployment at 6.1%. The figure just came out today, was 6.2% before that. That's relatively good. I think we're about the 19th in the country. And we expect to probably see that down to about 5% by the end of 2021. Non-farm employment jobs, 4.37 million. Again, that's up about 4 million from October, but it's still down about 222,000 for the year. So we are down with these non-farm jobs. A lot of those are in the service industry, restaurant industry. We expect those to pick up, but again, it's going to depend on how people, how people respond to this. The other thing looking at too is, in terms of the growth, is North Carolina is actually doing really well in real estate. Raleigh was ranked by PricewaterhouseCoopers as the number one real estate market in the country for 2021. And you look at the residential building permits, it's up quite a bit for this year relative to last year. It's about 12% up. We're about 7,300 for the year. So we're seeing a greater demand relative to supply in the third quarter, but I think that's catching up, and that's going to be good because home prices will probably still go up. Last thing I did want to talk about initial claims for unemployment. Initial claims were about 8,700 for the week ending 12/26, and that's down from 9,368 the week before. Remember, this peaked at about 140,000 in April. So it's up above its normal rate, which is 3,000 to 4,000, but we're seeing changes in that where the unemployment rate's falling, people are not on unemployment as long. One of the things we are seeing, of course, with the stimulus is actually savings have gone up, and we'll see how that plays in terms of investment. One other thing too, with the going back now to the real estate, Wilmington was ranked as the #1 destination, net destination with United Van Lines. Now, I don't take that with a whole, it's a very, very limited data set, but people are moving to North Carolina. This is actually one of the better places to be. Last thing I'll talk about with this is the coincident index, which is a measure of a broader measure of non-farm payroll, which I just talked about, unemployment rate. I talked about average hours of work in manufacturing, which are up, and wages. And that's, that goes from about 138 to 125 from January to February, but it's already back up to 135. And so things really are improving now. The expectations are we're going to see about a 5% increase in GDP for 2021. We'll probably see about a 1 to 1.1% decrease in unemployment during that time. The bigger one, of course, is restaurant industry, and we'll see where that goes. I just want to bring up one last thing with this, though, and the supply chain management, which I think is really important in terms of getting to understand why these things are really, tentative. I use two examples. That one is a pretty easy one. The other one's going to be a more complex one. But just when you saw the chicken sales that were going on the back of trucks with the start of this pandemic, these were chickens that were destined for commercial and restaurant use. But since they shut down, they couldn't transform that into selling them in supermarkets. So they had to sell them this way. And that's an example of the supply chain getting back together. Now, given the restaurants are up, the restaurant sales are down, but still they're getting these supply chains back. It's just going to take a little bit of time. The more extreme one, if you look at something like, we do have a lot with entertainment. You look at Durham Performing Arts Center, the Spirit Center in Charlotte. You have a bunch of people. I have a friend of mine from grade school when I lived in Texas who is a musician who travels the world. They've been out of job for, since this started, doing everything virtually. But when things get back together, it's not as if this is going to be a smooth transition. You're going to have people who have a big following who are going to be stuck in small venues, and people who have a smaller following that are going to be stuck in larger venues until we get, some continuity within this supply chain. And these are just examples of the supply chain we're looking at, whether you're talking chemicals and plastics from Fayetteville, especially dealing with international trade, even farm agricultural product, which is a big thing. I think 65% of our agriculture is livestock and animals. These are things that are going to take some time to get back in order. So even if we get all the vaccination done and COVID settled, we're still looking at some time horizon before things really do get back to normal, at least a year to probably a year and a half.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. Adam, if you could kind of give us a little insight from the financial world. The last time we actually had some folks with the North Carolina bankers right after the pandemic hit, and it was basically talk us through PPP, all that kind of good stuff. But we're kind of past that now into another area as far as we can. Who knows? But don't get too off there. But what are you seeing? What are you hearing from your clients? What's the word?
So you mentioned PPP, and I think for a lot of bankers, they're having PTSD from PPP, and here comes round two. We are actively working right now to figure out how to distribute what is round two of PPP. Looking back to last year, it's bizarre to think about what we were talking about in March and then what we're talking about in January, just 10 months later. I mean, we thought that as an industry, we would see massive losses, massive credit losses. We thought there would be a liquidity crisis. At this point, the credit losses have remained very low for us. And I think for a lot of banks, we're dealing with low rates, low interest rates for a very long period of time. And the liquidity crisis has actually, I would say, been turned on its head. And most financials at this point are swimming in liquidity, as well as a lot of individuals and businesses from all of the stimulus. Now, I've heard it referred to as the great dispersion, right? That there are people like Mark just described that are really struggling, and we see that and feel that. And then there are other industries that are really thriving right now, which is a bizarre thing to say, but I think us being in North Carolina is very, very helpful. I think that great dispersion has happened across our country and across the world as well. And if you look across the country right now, there are very few states that are performing as well and as big of beneficiaries of this crisis as North Carolina has been.
That's awesome. Thank you. You're right. It's been kind of very much this past year has been haves and have-nots in many ways. It's very, depending on the industry you're looking at, very different stories to be told for sure. If I can ask, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, we have said you can't be a good enough operator in some industries to have success. You can't be a bad enough operator not to have success in other industries through this. It is very industry specific, very geography specific, very group specific, and I think it's going to continue that way for a while.
Very true. Very true. Phil, from the manufacturing standpoint, that's a huge, massive industry, encompasses a lot of different companies doing different things. What Mark mentioned with the supply chain, that dovetails into it quite a bit. What are you hearing from the folks you're talking to out there in terms of the effects of 2020 and what they're looking for moving forward into 2021?
Yeah, it's really all the same story. It just depends on what you make. If you're a manufacturer, when the pandemic hit, North Carolina was very fortunate to be one of those states where manufacturing was deemed essential right away. So there was a short period of time where people were shut down just to try to figure out what was going on. But they quickly got their plants running again and being able to provide products for their customers, and so many companies, although things slowed down some, they didn't really just grind to a halt, like you would expect to see in other situations. So we started out working with manufacturers who were gearing up for the great PPE need, right? And so there are many people who were able to kind of salvage their business in some way by pivoting to the PPE and trying to help, meet the needs there. But, that didn't really last very long. I think, many companies were a little distraught about, the fact that they didn't get as much out of it as they thought they would. But in the meantime, people were beginning to understand how to keep their plant running and how to keep their workers safe. And so they were able to get back into some of their other businesses. But we work with, we have some CARES Act funds that we're using to help companies. And the companies that are really struggling, of course, are those who were selling into these depressed markets like hospitality or entertainment or cruise ships and all of that. That's just down, and we don't know when it's going to come back. And so we've been doing a lot of work with those companies to try to help them weather the storm there. And we're doing a lot of diversification projects, many things to try to work with these manufacturers to keep them going and keep their people employed until, they can get their business back. It's simple things like, people who make, snacks and nuts that goes on cruise ships and things like that. We have a company in North Carolina that was actually doing that. and so they were a multi-state company, and they had to consolidate their companies into North Carolina because of the pandemic. And so, those companies, as Mark was mentioning, I mean, it's just going to be a while, for manufacturing, you can just basically follow the places where there's low unemployment, and those companies who produce goods that sell into those areas, those are the ones that are really struggling. I mean, so there's a lot of optimism about the vaccine and what may happen later on this year. But again, until you can really see some of these areas get back in business, cruise ships start flowing, airplanes get fuller, manufacturing is going to, follow along with that. But again, the good news is that in many other areas, it's just been a boom. If you make home improvement products, all my neighbors up and down the road, they were doing all these projects, all summer long. And, you Home Depot and Lowe's and all those places were loaded. And so people who sell into those markets, manufacturers, have been doing a great, they had a boom during the pandemic. So just an interesting mix. And again, we're fortunate enough that North Carolina, we play into all those things in some kind of a way. And we have manufacturers that are selling into all of those booming markets, and we're getting a great business out of it.
That's very true in terms of it depends on what you make as well. Definitely a reflection of the times for sure. Courtney, if you don't mind me asking you said that a lot of your clients that you deal with, family businesses and construction specifically, from what I've been reading, it looks like that industry definitely has been doing very well with a lot of stuff in the pipeline and things like that. But what can you tell us about what you're hearing from your folks?
Hey, yes, very similar to what Phil talked about was it depends on what you do. So I have a lot of the GC contractors who are doing well. Some of the specialty subcontractors, depending on what their specialty is, are having a little bit of difficulty, but overall construction is doing well. The Triad, Raleigh, Charlotte markets. I think as Mark mentioned, permits are up. Construction was, deemed essential from the get-go. So they're all working. I think the labor shortage has been there for several years and it's still there. Sometimes you think that when unemployment goes up, that's not going to be a problem. But I do think the trade labor has been a problem for a couple of years and is still a problem. Working, I know that there's a lot of organizations working with, trade schools and high schools to try to get more people into that industry. But multifamily housing is up, commercial's up, obviously interest rates are low. A lot of people, the real estate market from a residential construction is booming. Houses are on the market for, a week. They're selling very quickly. People are very willing to build, and people are willing to buy. So a little bit of the supply chain interruption, with appliances, cabinets, those kind of things. But I do think, as Mark was saying, that will bounce back. Obviously, the unknowns of the spikes in commodities like lumber. A couple of weeks ago, a large spike in lumber. So I think, one of the things I've been talking with my clients about is sort of 3 words, and I know Phil sort of touched on this as well, is, diversification. I have a lot of GCs who are doing great. I have a GC whose main customer develops shopping malls and, strip malls. So they're not doing very well. So in the retail side, that's not doing as well. So we're talking about diversification, and we're talking about adaptability. What can you do different? How can you adapt? How can you get into new markets? And cross training, with people being out. you can't run a business when someone's sick, someone's out, and you can't run your business because, a handful of people are out. So what can you do to cross train your employees so you don't have that business interruption and that wait time? A lot of people were really worried. A lot of people are afraid to go back to work. Most of the laborers were fine and going to work and no problem there, but a lot of more of the folks in the office, in the enclosed spaces, they're the ones getting sick. They're the ones doing, of course, the accounting and some of the administration. So working with people to do some more cross training. And like I said, sort of trying to think outside the box of what can you do based on, of course, what your specialty is. But I think overall construction has done well. But like Phil said, it does depend on what your specialty is. So just trying to help, clients and help, some of those smaller construction companies sort of, reach across to different contracts and see how they can adapt and see how they can maybe change or learn some new services so that they can, keep the money coming in.
Yeah, pivoting is one that we've heard quite a bit of. It's probably one of the most overused terms of 2020, I think, is pivoting, without a doubt, for sure.
Yeah, well, a lot of those companies that, adapt, the distilleries who, started making ingenious,
Yep. That's exactly right. Exactly right. We do that well in North Carolina, for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, Carl, from your standpoint at the railroad, I would imagine that, and this can incorporate economic development too. We'll bring Stan in a little bit too, but that's one aspect of it. But a lot of the projects you work on, just I would imagine, and a lot of transportation projects are very long-term projects. So it's not like cancel this highway or cancel this project, because it's something that takes many years to complete. How is your industry looking at it from that standpoint?
I honestly think that those longer term projects, we haven't really seen a whole lot of change in terms of enthusiasm to pursue that. I think about, economic development projects where, people are looking at locating industry or doing things to modify their supply chains. And, we've not seen a drop in our pipeline of projects to work. Our economic development folks are still plenty busy. So I'm very encouraged by what I see, and it's largely because we operate in more of a long-term space.
Stan, what do you think from your standpoint, from an economic development viewpoint? Have you seen, it seems like we're still seeing announcements come through. People are still wanting to come to North Carolina. It doesn't seem like it's really slowed down too terribly much. Is that kind of the feeling you're getting?
Yeah, actually, project activity has been very robust, actually, and not only in this part of the state, but across the state. And as we meet with EDPNC and others, it's extremely active. Yeah, the tailwinds as we work our way through the next several quarters, and I think one of the interesting things about this year is it's not going to be linear. It's going to have a little bit of a hockey stick as we think about the fourth quarter of this year versus the first quarter, and things, service economy, et cetera, picks back up. But we've got some really good tailwinds that I think will help North Carolina post-COVID that were brought on because of COVID. One of them is, Mark alluded to, the regionalizing of supply chains. I mean, people are going to, and we're seeing it, they're putting, first cousin manufacturing enablers closer to, the core headquarters, if you would, so they have more control on that. Distribution. We've seen significant increase in distribution, not only from a industrial site perspective, but job growth perspective, and y'all seen them across the state. And so that's going to, and because of where we're situated, not only in the Triad, but where North Carolina is situated, very strong. you've got this whole reshoring initiative that has been growing in volume, if you would. And we're seeing that definitely in this region. And I would say very specifically in the last 90 days, the number of calls that we're getting from the Northeast, kind of just over the transom, we're moving south. North Carolina gets a look at a lot of those projects. So I think you've got some shifts brought on by the pandemic, some a little longer. The whole reshoring phenomenon has been going on longer than that. And you put those in the mixing bowl with nice population growth, workforce, the industries that have been alluded to that enable what's going on in our households, or the furniture industry, everything that's got anything to do with outdoors is wonderful. And we do a lot of that in North Carolina, from fabrics to furniture to all kinds of things. And so I'm actually very encouraged and very optimistic as each quarter passes along. It'll get better and better. Lastly, I just say we've announced, over the last 6 months in this part of the state, about 4,500 new jobs. Yeah, that's a pretty good number in this kind of environment, and they're all kind of positioning for this economy coming back to something that would deem a little bit more normal.
So basically, it sounds like you guys, and this is interesting too. You mentioned supply chain, and it seems like the Triad itself is extremely well positioned to address supply chain issues because it's got such a history of doing that, even before all this stuff.
Yeah, I'm on a few private company boards, and the whole, Mark said it so well. I mean, supply chain, I think we probably all underappreciated how integrated that is into our economy and how disrupted it became. But it is straightening itself out. But we, from manufacturing to distribution to component parts, that's my point around, on a relative basis, I think economies that have historically manufacturing, we've had some challenges, but I think this can play a little bit to our favor as we come out the other side of this.
And you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Anytime somebody says something about supply chain and they have a question about it, all you have to do is just say, it's the Charmin dilemma, right? The toilet paper. That's it. Then they'll totally understand what it's all about. Scott, similar to Phil, the businesses that you deal with and represent encompass a bunch of different industries, right? It's tons of such. It's manufacturing, it's construction, transportation, all that kind of stuff. But with the military, angle to it, and from that standpoint, I haven't heard anything from that side of things about how was 2020 and what are they looking for 2021. What are you hearing?
Hey, listen, it's a great transition. So I'm really glad to be able to share some of this information with you because you'll be the first ones to hear some of this. So I think Phil nailed it when he said a lot of it depends on what you make. I would add to that, and it's been alluded to, it has a lot to do with who you sell to. The federal government is who we help businesses sell to. So although our name is the Military Business Center, we help businesses identify opportunities, compete for contracts, and sell their goods and services to all federal agencies. And people don't understand that the federal or defense market is the second largest sector of our state's economy. It's what I call a supermarket. It crosses over many industries, but it is the second largest market, if you will, with about a $66 billion impact on our economy, and about 12% of our state gross domestic product is involved with support to the military and defense contracting. So 2020 was a boom year. And in a year when other things were down, defense contracting hit new records in our state. DOD prime contracts executed in North Carolina hit $6 billion in 2020. And by the way, the figures are not complete yet for FY 2020 and won't be for about another 2 months. If you look at all federal agencies and their buys in North Carolina, hit $9.5 billion in 2020. And to put that in perspective, that's a $2.4 billion increase in what we had in North Carolina in 2019, which was a $1 billion increase over 2018. So the federal market, the defense market in North Carolina is hitting new records and is extremely strong. The impact of COVID certainly was significant, mostly in the federal contracting, certainly accelerated our medical, surgical, pharmaceuticals, PPE, anything related to medical products, services, and pharmaceuticals were way up. A lot of purchasing by not only DOD, but the DHHS and the Veterans Administration, of which we have 4 major facilities in North Carolina. Concerns we heard from manufacturers were really primarily, as Phil indicated, first of all, in workforce and being able to keep their workforce on, and supply chain disruptions. The concern going forward has been, would the federal agencies be able to sustain their contracting pace in 2021? But we're really not seeing that their ability to put out contracts has slowed down. To points brought up by Courtney, construction is typically about 35% of defense contracting in North Carolina, and it was a boom year in 2020, principally with the Navy, an award of about $1.7 billion in Hurricane Florence recovery construction at Camp Lejeune and Cherry Point. And that's going to be going on for about 2 to 3 years. So although it was awarded in 2020, we're really going to see the execution of that in 2021 and beyond. So never thought I'd say that hurricanes could have a positive impact, but when other opportunities were down, that Hurricane Florence award is going to pay off us for a long time. So as we look into 2021 nationally, trends that we see are really that DoD contracts going to be steady. Even with the new administration, we think purchasing across DoD in 2021 is going to be pretty steady. Federal contracting is going to still be dominated by COVID and acquisition of all those products and services by various federal agencies in 2021. IT modernization, the federal government's gone online this year, like all of us have. So IT modernization is going to be big. Artificial intelligence, machine learning are huge growth sectors in the federal market. Everybody's aware of the solar winds and the big cyber disruptions that have happened in federal agencies. So cybersecurity is a growing area of obviously concern for everybody, but business opportunities will certainly be presented in 2021. Here in North Carolina, the picture is a little bit different than that. Construction is going to be huge. Again, not so much an award of future contracts, but execution of a lot of that work that's already been awarded, about $2 billion worth of work. So that represents a lot of subcontracting opportunity for trades and specialty contractors, designers, construction suppliers all across the state. Really need to be looking at opportunities there at Camp Lejeune and Cherry Point that are just starting off in 2021. Normally our non-hurricane construction is going to be down a little bit, but our sustainment, restoration, modernization work we expect to remain strong. The biggest impact obviously is going to be the unknowns. So we've got some serious unknowns in not only in North Carolina but nationally. First of all, I would say is the level of North Carolina small business participation in this market, whether it's in construction, whether it's in IT. There's going to be many large service-related contracts, agency-wide contracts, VA contracts, GSA contracts for services, everything from office services to network services to IT hardware and software that are going to be competed in 2021. We have to get the small businesses in North Carolina focused on these large opportunities, either as primes or on company teams with other primes. COVID, obviously, how fast that gets resolved and what the impact is on other federal purchasing is yet to be seen. CMMC and cybersecurity, the DoD has implemented new cybersecurity standards that all small businesses have to meet. Well, all businesses have to meet, and prime contractors are flowing those requirements down to the supply chain and to small businesses. So we are working very hard with Phil and the MEP and other agencies through our interagency coordinating committee on cybersecurity to make sure our small businesses are informed about what the actual requirements are, because there's a lot of misinformation, and resources that we have available in North Carolina to help them become compliant with those cybersecurity requirements. Another unknown, I would say, is the impact of recruitment of new businesses to North Carolina that can compete in the federal market. And a major development that we've had at the end of 2020 was that GM Defense was selected to provide the in-squad vehicle to the United States Army and ultimately to the Marine Corps. And that vehicle is going to be produced in Concord, North Carolina, in a partnership between GM Defense and Hendrick Motorsports. It's actually going to make the frame and the roll cage. So big news there. So the level of competition of small businesses being in the market, the impact the election will have on various sectors. We expect increases in sustainable energy, anything climate related, medical, environmental, and construction to remain strong. So although we've got a lot of unknowns out there, our crystal ball says it's going to remain very strong. I would expect maybe new federal contract awards in the state may not meet our 2020 levels, which are phenomenal. But we think that the federal market, the DoD market, will remain strong, and a lot of opportunities for small businesses to take advantage of small business programs federally and here within the state of North Carolina.